On my 60th, while the cake candles smoked, my family served me papers colder than the November rain. The band at Montgomery Inn was halfway through Sweet Caroline, and the room smelled like ribs and apple glaze when Carla tapped a fork against a glass. Evan stepped beside her with a stiff little smile, the kind you practice in a mirror. He handed me a birthday card that felt too heavy for paper. Inside were two things: an eviction notice dated November 16th and the front page of divorce papers with my name printed neat as a label. For a second I thought it was a prank, some cruel gag from a nephew. Then I felt the floor tilt, like the Ohio River had just moved under the banquet hall. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Carla's voice was calm, rehearsed. Tom, it's time we simplify. It'll be better for everyone. Evan wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept his hands in his pockets, jaw tight, like he knew the part he was playing. I stared at the word vacate, then at the cake that said, Happy 60, Tom, where the zero candle sputtered out first as if the decade had given up. A server froze mid-step with a tray of sweet tea, eyes darting to the legal seal on that eviction like it might spill. I folded the papers back into the card and walked out into the drizzle. In the parking lot, the cold hit my chest so hard I felt short of breath. I sat in my truck with the dome light on, heart pounding, and opened the envelope again just to make sure my eyes weren't lying. There was a second sheet, a proposal, suggesting I move out by December 1st into a short-term rental, to keep tensions low. Paper-clipped to it, like a receipt for humiliation, was a crumpled boutique law firm invoice for $2,800. The ink gleamed faintly, like it hadn't even dried. My phone buzzed. A text from Evan: It's cleaner this way. You'll be fine, Dad. Cleaner. I thought about the 28 years I spent fixing air handlers at the hospital, the double shifts, the night I paid off the mortgage in May 2018 and held the letter like a trophy. That house wasn't just wood and nails, it was my retirement. The drive home felt longer than it was. Wet leaves stuck to the curbs, porch lights fogged in drizzle. Inside the kitchen, the fridge relay clicked on loud in the silence. On the counter sat a thin stack of new mail addressed to someone I didn't know, Evan Properties LLC. My name wasn't on it. My name wasn't anywhere. A magnet held a credit card slip on the fridge: Riverview Locksmith Service Call. October 28th. Not my handwriting. Not my signature. I touched my house key and it suddenly felt like a fake. I didn't sleep. I laid the deed, the payoff letter, and the eviction side by side across the table and photographed them with trembling hands. Not for memory, for proof. Proof that something was being stolen in plain sight. At 12:01 a.m., the house felt colder than the rain outside. I pulled the chair closer to the table, opened a new spiral notebook, and wrote 3 words in block letters: Every receipt counts. The silence in my kitchen the next morning was so loud I could hear the fridge relay click on and off. I hadn't closed my eyes all night. The eviction notice, the mortgage payoff letter from 2018, and the divorce petition sat lined up across the table like opponents in a card game. The edges curled slightly under the lamp, and I kept straightening them, as if order on the table could bring order to my life. At 5:12 a.m. on November 17th, I pulled my old lockbox from the hall closet. Inside were the trophies of 30 years, the deed to the house, the title to my truck, insurance papers yellowing at the edges. I spread them out one by one, the way you might lay photos across a coffin. My hand brushed the mortgage payoff letter again, dated May 2018. I whispered the date aloud like it was a prayer. That house was supposed to be my retirement. Every double shift, every Christmas I spent replacing filters instead of sitting with family, was banked into those walls. And now Carla and Evan wanted me to move into some short-term rental by December 1st, like a stranger who had overstayed his welcome. By mid-morning, I couldn't sit still. I drove aimlessly along the Ohio River, sleet tickling the windshield, wipers beating like a metronome. At one point, I pulled into a self-storage facility. I walked into the office and asked for a brochure. The clerk slid one across the counter. It smelled of fresh ink. I stared at the prices for 10 by 10 units, thinking about boxing up my life into metal cubicles. My chest tightened. I walked out without signing, tossed the brochure on the passenger seat, and sat there watching my breath fog the glass. When I finally drove home, Carla still hadn't returned. Her side of the closet looked hollow, her jewelry box was gone, the good suitcase missing. In the dresser drawer, the groove where I always set my wallet felt emptier than usual. I sat on the bed, hands resting on my knees, listening to a house that suddenly seemed hostile. At 6:30 that evening, I wandered back into the kitchen. I made coffee though I didn't need it, poured it into a chipped mug, and stared at the fridge. That locksmith receipt, Riverview Locksmith, October 28th, was still pinned under the chili pepper magnet. The words blurred. I pulled my phone from my pocket, snapped a picture, and saved it under a folder I created right then, proof. It wasn't nostalgia anymore. It was evidence. My hands shook so badly I had to set the mug down before I spilled it. My phone buzzed just as I did. It was Evan again. This is cleaner for everyone. His words burned more than the hot coffee. Cleaner. Like I was dirt to be swept out of the corners of the house I built for him to grow up in. I walked through each room, snapping photos. The empty vanity. The missing family pictures. Even the grooves in the carpet where her suitcases had been dragged out. I told myself I wasn't losing my mind, I was building a record. I opened my notebook and wrote down times, dates, impressions, anything that could anchor me when emotions blurred the facts. By the time the sky turned black, I felt both drained and wired. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the flickering shadows from the streetlights. My phone screen glowed in my hand, the law firm's number printed in neat serif type on that $2,800 invoice. I dialed it, not even sure what I'd say. A receptionist answered. "Thank you for calling Mason and Rowe." I cleared my throat. Did my wife hire you?" There was a pause. Papers shuffled. "Sir, I can't discuss specifics, but yes, we met with your family recently." "Strategic planning, I believe." "Strategic planning." I ended the call before she could say more. My hand was slick with sweat. That was when it hit me like a brick. I was not just being left. I was being maneuvered. A plan was already in motion, one that treated me like an obstacle on a chessboard. The coffee on the counter had gone cold. I took a picture of that too. Not because I needed it for court, but because it captured the truth of that night, a life left to cool on the counter, while the people I loved were already moving on without me. I sat back down at the kitchen table, pulled the eviction notice close, and underlined the date with my pen. November 16th. The night they chose to blindside me. Then I wrote a single line beneath it, "Find out everything." That was the moment the collapse shifted into something else. I didn't sleep on November 18th either. By dawn, I was flipping through the spiral notebook like a detective instead of a man with a family. Every line I'd written the night before felt like a breadcrumb. Find out everything. Those 3 words burned in the middle of the page. On the morning of November 19th, I drove downtown, past the courthouse, past the river where fog hung low, and into the brick building that housed Avery Chen's law office. I'd known Avery in passing through the union, sharp, steady, the kind of lawyer who didn't sell theatrics but outcomes. Her office smelled of lemon polish and old case files. I laid the eviction notice, the boutique law firm bill for $2,800, and the divorce petition on her walnut desk like cards in a losing hand. "They want me out by December 1st, I told her. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. Avery leaned back, steepling her fingers. "Let's slow this down. What do you own?" I listed it out, the house, fully paid since May 2018, a modest pension, 1 truck, a small annuity. She circled the eviction notice. You can't just be forced out. This isn't California landlord court. You've got rights, Tom. Her assistant knocked and passed me to Nadia, a title officer 2 doors down. Nadia wore square glasses and moved with the calm of someone used to sorting chaos. She pulled up the property chain of title and printed it out. The paper slapped against her desk. At the bottom was a pending quitclaim deed, Carla attempting to transfer ownership to Evan Properties LLC. The date, November 3rd. I stared at the words like they were in a foreign language. Nadia pointed to the margin. It's flagged. Whoever filed it didn't include the full legal description. That's the only reason it hasn't been recorded yet. I felt my stomach knot. Carla had already tried to hand the house to Evan before the party. The birthday stunt wasn't the betrayal, it was the victory lap. I walked back to Avery's office with the printout trembling in my hand. She scanned it, then looked at me hard. You're not crazy, Tom. You're being maneuvered. But a flagged filing buys us time. We'll move on this right away. That afternoon, I signed Avery's retainer check for $2,500. My hand shook, but it was the steady kind of shake that comes with resolve. She advised me to document every lock change, every missing item, every receipt. Methodical wins, she said. We don't need drama. We need proof. She handed me a card for Ray Delgado, a retired sheriff turned licensed private investigator. He doesn't break rules. He documents them. By evening, I'd wired him a retainer of $1,800. His voice on the phone was gravelly, reassuring. We'll start with locks, contractors, and paper trails. That night, I opened a fresh checking account at my credit union. I diverted my direct deposit, moving quietly so nothing could be drained. Then I bought a cheap spiral notebook from the drugstore and started my daily log in block letters: date, time, evidence, notes. November 19th entry, spoke with Avery. Quitclaim filed November 3rd. Flagged. Retainer signed. Contacted PI. Opened new account. Every receipt is my pension. For the first time in days, I felt a thread of control slip back into my hands. Not peace, just a thread. At 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. Ray's voice was calm. Your locks were changed October 28th. I've got the contractor receipt and CCTV showing Evan buying a set at 2:17 p.m. paid with Carla's Visa. Last 4 digits match her Costco card. I closed my eyes, let the words sink in. They hadn't just planned for weeks, they'd already acted. My key was nothing but a prop. I walked to the back door, slid the key in, and felt the resistance. Different pins. A lock that wasn't mine anymore. I didn't force it. Instead, I took a picture of the scratches on the doorplate, then I wrote in my log, October 28th. Locks changed. Evidence in hand. The house groaned with winter wind. I sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open, the eviction notice under my palm, and whispered it again, every receipt counts. This wasn't collapse anymore. It was planning. The first clean wind tasted like cold water after a storm. By November 25th, Avery had filed a notice of interest in the property and drafted a temporary restraining order in case Carla or Evan tried to push me out again. It wasn't dramatic, it was paperwork. But paperwork can be armor. For the first time since my birthday, I slept a little longer than an hour at a time. Ray kept feeding me details. He'd pulled the CCTV from the hardware store showing Evan at the register, a lock set in his hands, time-stamped October 28th at 2:17 p.m. The receipt showed Carla's Visa number ending in 4421, the same digits on an old Costco slip I had tucked in a drawer. Proof stacked itself without me saying a word. On the morning of the 25th, Nadia emailed me scans from the county recorder's office. A new document had surfaced, a home equity line of credit, opened in July, limit $120,000. $94,000 already drawn, $40,000 on July 22, $54,000 on September 9. Both signed under my name. But the signature looked like it had been traced by a drunk hand. I printed the pages, laid them next to my old tax return where my real signature curved smooth and confident. I could see the difference with the naked eye. Still, it wasn't enough to know, I needed experts. Avery promised we'd line up a handwriting analysis. Thanksgiving came and went with no turkey, no family. Carla texted, "Separate this year makes sense. Let's keep it civil." I stared at the message, then at the empty kitchen table where a pie usually sat. My only guest was the spiral notebook. On November 26, I wrote, "Carla proposes civility. House paying $584 monthly HELOC interest." My name forged. Luis, my old union buddy turned CPA, stopped by the 27th. He carried 2 manila folders fat with highlighted statements. "Look here," he said, tapping with a thick finger. "Payments to something called Pioneer Ridge Ventures LLC, $31,400 over 6 months. Evans Shell Company. They're bleeding you dry, Tom." I stared at the figures until they blurred, then snapped photos of every page. Luis squeezed my shoulder. "Don't think of it as betrayal. Think of it as theft. Thieves get caught. Methodical." That became my mantra. Each night, I wrote down the time I checked the locks, the pieces of mail I photographed, the receipts I logged. I even recorded when the fridge kicked on, because silence makes you paranoid, and facts pull you back. December 1 loomed, the date they'd given me to move into a short-term rental. But I wasn't packing boxes. Avery had the TRO ready, my affidavit signed, Ray's CCTV footage sealed in a flash drive. On December 2, I came home from a late shift. My key slid into the back door, turned, and spun air. The lock had been swapped again. For a second, rage pushed me to shoulder the door. But methodical wins. I pulled out my phone, snapped the lock's gleaming brass, noted the time, 8:43 p.m., and texted Ray. His reply came fast, "Perfect. This triggers TRO. Judge will not like this." I stood on the porch, cold air slicing through my jacket, and felt the strangest calm. They thought they were tightening the noose. They didn't know they'd just tightened my case. I walked to the truck, opened my notebook, and wrote in block letters, December 2. Lockout attempt. Evidence logged. Then I underlined it twice. By December 5, I'd be back in court, not as a broken man, but as someone with a paper trail. This wasn't just planning anymore. It was the first step of revenge. A judge's stamp hits paper with the weight of a hammer. On the morning of December 5, Avery and I stood shoulder to shoulder in courtroom 2C. The bailiff called our case, and Avery laid out the story in clean, steady lines: the birthday ambush, the October lock change, the forged HELOC, the quitclaim flagged by the recorder's office. She handed up the boutique law firm invoice for $2,800 and Ray's photographs of the new locks. The judge, gray hair brushed back like stone, flipped through the packet and finally looked up. Temporary restraining order granted. Mr. Dalton will have access restored. Any further attempts to encumber or transfer the property are barred until this matter is resolved. The gavel cracked. For the first time in weeks, my lungs filled all the way. That night, back in my kitchen, I unlocked my own back door. The lock clicked like music. I slept under my own roof again, though the house still felt like it was watching me. On December 7, Evan cornered me in the garage. He leaned against the workbench, trying to sound casual. "You'll be fine, Dad. You've got your pension. Don't act like you're losing everything." His wrist flashed a new watch I hadn't seen before. I stared at it, then at him. I worked 30 years for that pension, Evan. And I worked 30 years for this house. He shrugged, as if I were the unreasonable one. My phone buzzed just then, a bank alert. Scheduled payment, Hellick interest $584. I held it up so he could see. The house is paying for your schemes now. His face went blank, but his jaw flexed. By midweek, Ray had tracked down the notary listed on the quitclaim attempt, Carla's cousin, Marla. He requested a copy of her journal. If your name is in there, and you weren't present, that's forgery, plain and simple. The kitchen grew colder that night, though the oven was on preheat. I stood there while the timer beeped to an empty room. Carla hadn't cooked in weeks. The sound pierced the silence, mocking in its way. I jotted it down in the notebook. December 10th, oven timer beeped. Nobody cooking. Luis, steady as ever, called with another find. Look at your December statements, he said. See these $3,200 withdrawals? They match a wire to Midland Handyman. That's your lock change. They used your own accounts to pay someone to shut you out. I took the printout to the kitchen table, laid it beside the eviction notice, the locksmith receipt, the boutique invoice. It was becoming a mosaic of betrayal. Each piece clicked against the other until the picture was too sharp to deny. On December 12th, Ray texted me a photo of the notary journal. There it was, my name, my supposed signature, notarized at 2:30 p.m. on August 12th. That was the day I'd worked a double shift at the hospital, clocked in at 6:11 a.m., clocked out at 6:05 p.m. There was no way I had been at a coffee shop signing anything. I pressed the photo against the table, my hand shaking, and whispered, they really thought they could erase me. The tension had shifted now. It wasn't me unraveling anymore, it was their story unraveling. They'd pushed too far. And I had the proof. We walked into courtroom 3B on January 10th like it was a stage they'd built, forgetting I knew my lines better than they did. The air smelled of paper and coffee, the kind that's brewed in courthouse basements. I sat at the petitioner's table with Avery at my side. Across the aisle, Carla and Evan whispered with their attorney, eyes darting everywhere but toward me. The judge, silver hair combed back, glasses perched low, opened the file. We're here regarding property disputes, alleged forgery, and improper transfer attempts involving Mr. Dalton's residence. His voice was dry, but it carried. Avery rose. Your Honor, this is not just a divorce case. This is a calculated attempt to strip a man of his paid-off home, his retirement security, and his dignity. We will show attempted fraudulent transfer, forgery of financial documents, and unauthorized encumbrances against the property. She placed Exhibit 1 on the table, the eviction notice dated November 16th, slipped into my birthday card. On the very night Mr. Dalton turned 60, his wife and son blindsided him with this eviction. Simultaneously, they had already attempted a quitclaim transfer to an entity called Evan Properties LLC. The judge raised an eyebrow. Carla's attorney shifted in his seat. Exhibit 2 followed, the flagged quitclaim, printed from the recorder's office. Avery pointed to the missing legal description. The only reason this fraudulent deed wasn't recorded was clerical error. Then came Exhibit 3, the Hellick documents. Opened July 22nd, $40,000 drawn. September 9th, another $54,000 drawn. Signed under Mr. Dalton's name. She handed up the handwriting expert's report. High probability of simulation. Not his hand. This debt was placed on the marital property without his knowledge. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Dalton, you're telling me you didn't authorize this loan? I stood. My knees felt weak, but my voice was steady. I never touched those papers, Your Honor. I was at work every day those signatures were supposedly made. I've got time cards, I've got pay stubs. They forged my name. Avery nodded. And we'll show corroboration. Ray was called next. He introduced Exhibit 4, CCTV footage from October 28, timestamped 2:17 p.m., showing Evan buying a lock set at a hardware store. He paid with a Visa card ending in 4421. Belongs to Carla Dalton. He clicked the photo of the receipt into evidence. The judge looked at Evan. Mr. Dalton, why were you changing locks on a house under restraining order review? Evan shifted in his chair, face flushing. We thought, he glanced at his mother. We thought Dad wouldn't mind. A ripple of laughter ran through the gallery before the judge banged his gavel. Order. Next came Diane, my neighbor, sworn in with trembling hands. She testified how she saw Evan carrying a lockbox into my garage the afternoon of October 28. I remember because it was the same day my granddaughter's birthday balloons were tied to the porch. I watched him take it inside. Then came Exhibit 5, the notary journal, showing my supposed signature notarized on August 12 at 2:30 p.m. Avery handed up my time card for that exact day, clocked in 6:11 a.m., clocked out 6:05 p.m. The judge studied both for a long moment, then looked directly at Carla. Mrs. Dalton, care to explain how your husband signed this document while working a 12-hour shift across town? Carla's lips parted, but no words came out. Her attorney leaned close, whispering frantically, but she just shook her head. The final nail came with Exhibit 6, the staging consultation flyer addressed to Evan Properties LLC, dated January 4. Avery held it up. While under a court order not to transfer or encumber the property, they were actively preparing to stage and sell the home. This flyer proves intent. The judge exhaled sharply. He leaned back in his chair, then forward again, speaking slowly. This court finds the quitclaim void. The HELOC is hereby frozen pending fraud review. Mr. Dalton retains access and possession of the residence. Any further interference will be considered contempt. This matter is referred to the county prosecutor for potential notary misconduct. The gavel fell. 3 sharp cracks. Carla stared down at the table, her shoulders shaking. Evan rubbed his temples, jaw tight, eyes darting anywhere but mine. Outside the courtroom, the air felt cleaner, sharper. Evan muttered as we passed in the hallway, "You didn't have to scorch earth." I stopped, looked him dead in the eye, and said quietly, "I didn't scorch earth. I watered the truth." He looked away. As Avery packed the files, I felt the strangest mix of exhaustion and relief. Weeks of sleepless nights, photographs, receipts, and notes, all those quiet hours hunched over the spiral notebook, had led to this. Justice wasn't loud. It was methodical. And in that courtroom, it had spoken louder than betrayal ever could. Justice doesn't roar, it itemizes. Within a week of the hearing, January 14, the bank's fraud unit finally called. A woman named Tessa spoke in the clipped voice of someone trained not to promise. Mr. Dalton, given the documentation you and your counsel submitted, the notary journal, time cards, handwriting report, we're placing the HELOC under fraud review. No further interest will accrue while we investigate. I wrote it down exactly in my notebook, January 14, HELOC interest paused. Review active. Then she added, provisional credit is possible, pending documentation from our end. I underlined, possible, twice. Hope is a dangerous solvent, it can dissolve your caution if you let it. That afternoon, Avery emailed me a scanned letter from Mason & Rowe, the boutique firm that billed the $2,800. They were withdrawing representation for conflicts. Translation: their client's story had sprung a leak. I printed the letter and paper clipped it to their bill like a matched set. Ray texted a screenshot of the notary board's intake acknowledgement. Your complaint and exhibits have been received. Case number assigned. He added, they don't move fast, but they do move. I wrote, January 14, notary inquiry opened. Evan texted me that night, can we talk? Mom's panicking. panicking. The word sat on the screen like a dropped glass. We met at a diner on the corner of Riverside and Oakwood the next morning. The coffee tasted like late nights and old Formica. Evan slid into the booth across from me, eyes ringed, hair uncombed. For a second, I saw the kid who once asked me to tie his skates tighter. Then he cleared his throat and launched into a speech about investors, runway, burn rate, as if numbers could crowd out what he'd done. I didn't know about the forgery, he said, voice low. Mom handled paperwork. I thought it was approved. I set my phone on the table, screen lit with a photo, the October 28th lock receipt, Visa ending 4421. You bought the lock with her card, I said. And you carried it into my garage. Diane watched you. You knew enough. He stared at the sugar packets like they might tell him the right answer. I thought you'd land on your feet. I did, I said. Under my own roof. Silence. The waitress refilled our coffee without asking. Evan's hand shook as he reached for the cup. He didn't drink. Back at Avery's, we moved from relief to reinforcement. She filed a motion for exclusive use of the residence during the divorce and a stipulated order barring any further encumbrances. We keep the gains we've made, she said. No free shots while the bank sorts its mess. On January 20th, an email landed from Carla's new attorney with a subject line that sounded like a white flag, proposed terms. They offered to let me keep the house and any fraud credits that might come, if we divided personal property and she kept her car and certain furnishings. One condition, I told Avery. A written acknowledgement that the quitclaim attempt was improper. Avery didn't blink. We'll make it part of the order. 2 days later, the document arrived, 3 paragraphs of careful legal language with a single sentence that mattered. Respondent acknowledges that the attempted transfer to Evan Properties LLC lacked proper authorization and was improper. Carla's initials sat at the bottom like a verdict. I printed a copy for the file, another for the safe, and, because I'm a stubborn man, one for the fridge under the chili pepper magnet, between the locksmith receipt and the staging flyer. My kitchen had become a bulletin board of consequences. At night, the house felt different. Not warm, just less hostile. The heater's hum sounded like a machine doing its job instead of an animal hiding in the walls. I cleaned out a drawer, installed a small fireproof safe, and labeled a folder, Bank, Fraud Credits. When you've been ambushed once, you learn to keep your armor within reach. Evan texted again, short, almost ashamed, sorry. I stared at the word and did nothing with it. Sorry is a bridge you have to rebuild from both sides. I wasn't crossing alone. Avery called late on the 20th, we're close to an agreed order. The judge will sign if both sides accept the language. It preserves everything the court already ruled and locks in Carla's acknowledgement. I thanked her, then sat at the kitchen table, staring at the notebook's first page. The block letters had faded a little from how often I'd traced them with my thumb, every receipt counts. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote, Fallout isn't fire. It's paper. Then the date, January 20th. Outside, the river kept moving, gray and steady. Inside, the roar of the last months had finally become a ledger. And a ledger, for all its coldness, was something I could balance. The mailbox had become an enemy these past months. Bills, notices, envelopes that felt like traps. But on January 24th, for the first time, it delivered something different, a plain white letter from the bank's fraud unit. My hands trembled as I slid it open, expecting more delays. Instead, in clean black print, it said, provisional credit of $94,000 applied pending final decision. I sat on the porch steps, the cold air stinging my lungs, and read the sentence again. 94,000. Every forged dollar they had yanked from my home was now back in my column, even if temporary. I underlined it in my notebook, then wrote the word justice next to it. That afternoon, Nadia from the title office called. The chain's clear, Tom. The quitclaim's void. Your name is the only one that belongs on the deed. Her voice had that calm certainty I'd come to trust. I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes, letting the words settle into the walls. The house was mine again, not because it always should have been, but because I fought to prove it. The court signed the agreed order 2 days later. Carla kept her car, a few pieces of furniture, and some jewelry. I kept the house, unencumbered, and the bank was bound to hold me harmless for the hellick until they confirmed who signed it. Most importantly, the order contained the sentence I'd demanded: respondent acknowledges the attempted transfer was improper. Her initials beside that line were worth more than gold. I walked through each room like it was new. In the hallway, I touched the marks on the doorframe where Evan's height had been charted in pencil. In the bedroom, I opened the drawer where Carla's jewelry box once sat. And in the kitchen, I replaced the old lock myself, this time with a receipt in my name, stapled neatly into my folder. Justice isn't about erasing what happened. It's about owning it so fully that no one can deny it. That's why I went further. I updated my will, leaving the house to Evan only if he rebuilt trust, with a charity named as secondary beneficiary. I called Avery to witness the signature. She nodded. Smart. Boundaries with teeth. When the safe was bolted to the closet floor, I placed inside 3 things: the deed, the bank's fraud letter, and the quitclaim acknowledgement. Then I shut the lid, turned the key, and exhaled. On January 28th, Carla and I met in Avery's conference room to divide photos and books. She wept once, sharp and brief. I didn't comfort her. I didn't sneer either. We passed albums across the table like we were trading relics. When it was over, she walked out with her car keys jangling, and I stayed behind, staring at the papers we'd signed. No more tricks. Just signatures that told the truth. That night, I cooked myself dinner, real dinner, not microwave meals, and when the oven timer beeped, it wasn't mocking me. It was mine. Justice doesn't roar. It doesn't scream. It arrives in plain envelopes and signed orders, in frozen loans and voided deeds. It arrives when the house you nearly lost greets you at the door with locks you bought yourself. I sat at the kitchen table, notebook open, and wrote one final line for the day: justice is proof made permanent. The house sounded different once the fear left. On January 28th, after signing the last property lists in Avery's office, I drove home along the Ohio River. The sky was pale gray, the kind that makes the water look like steel. For weeks, I'd driven this route with a knot in my chest. That night, it was still there, but smaller, like a knot that finally came loose after years of pulling. I unlocked my own front door with the new brass key and stepped into a silence that no longer threatened me. The heater hummed steady, not sinister. The walls no longer leaned in with secrets, they just stood, plain and honest, like they had for 30 years. I carried the signed acknowledgement from Carla into the kitchen and placed it under the chili pepper magnet on the fridge. Beside it, the locksmith's slip, the staging flyer, the bank's fraud letter. My kitchen had become a gallery of survival. I sat at the table, spreading the spiral notebook open to its first page. Block letters, written the night of my birthday, every receipt counts, I traced the words with my thumb. That line had carried me through collapse, through court, through betrayal. And now it meant something more. I thought about the people who might hear this story, men and women who've worked too long to be called replaceable by the very ones they raised. Folks who held on to receipts not because they liked paperwork, but because they knew proof is sometimes all you have when love turns its back. Justice, I learned, isn't loud. It's quiet, boring even. It's filing the right forms, snapping the right photos, saving the right slips. It's walking into a courtroom armed not with anger but with a paper trail. And for people like me, 60 years old, closer to retirement than to beginnings, that kind of justice is enough. I made dinner that night, real dinner. Chicken in the oven, potatoes sizzling in a pan. When the timer beeped, I smiled. Not because of the food, but because the sound no longer mocked me. It reminded me I was still here, still standing in the house I paid for with years of sweat and double shifts. Evan emailed on February 1st. Just one line, can we meet? I have a plan. Plans. Always his word. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I wrote in my notebook, reflection, justice is not revenge. It's a boundary with proof behind it, I closed the book and looked around the kitchen. The light over the table flickered slightly, the way it always did in winter. For the first time in months, I didn't see it as a flaw. I saw it as a reminder, things aren't perfect, but they're mine. And that, after everything, was enough. The house sounded different once the fear left. On January 28th, after signing the last property lists in Avery's office, I drove home along the Ohio River. The sky was pale gray, the kind that makes the water look like steel. For weeks, I'd driven this route with a knot in my chest. That night, it was still there, but smaller, like a knot that finally came loose after years of pulling. I unlocked my own front door with the new brass key and stepped into a silence that no longer threatened me. The heater hummed steady, not sinister. The walls no longer leaned in with secrets, they just stood, plain and honest, like they had for 30 years. I carried the signed acknowledgement from Carla into the kitchen and placed it under the chili pepper magnet on the fridge. Beside it, the locksmith's slip, the staging flyer, the bank's fraud letter. My kitchen had become a gallery of survival. I sat at the table, spreading the spiral notebook open to its first page. Block letters, written the night of my birthday, every receipt counts. I traced the words with my thumb. That line had carried me through collapse, through court, through betrayal. And now it meant something more. I thought about the people who might hear this story, men and women who've worked too long to be called replaceable by the very ones they raised. Folks who held on to receipts not because they liked paperwork, but because they knew proof is sometimes all you have when love turns its back. Justice, I learned, isn't loud. It's quiet, boring even. It's filing the right forms, snapping the right photos, saving the right slips. It's walking into a courtroom armed not with anger but with a paper trail. And for people like me, 60 years old, closer to retirement than to beginnings, that kind of justice is enough. I made dinner that night, real dinner. Chicken in the oven, potatoes sizzling in a pan. When the timer beeped, I smiled. Not because of the food, but because the sound no longer mocked me. It reminded me I was still here, still standing in the house I paid for with years of sweat and double shifts. Evan emailed on February 1st. Just one line, can we meet? I have a plan. Plans. Always his word. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I wrote in my notebook, reflection, justice is not revenge. It's a boundary with proof behind it. I closed the book and looked around the kitchen. The light over the table flickered slightly, the way it always did in winter. For the first time in months, I didn't see it as a flaw. I saw it as a reminder, things aren't perfect, but they're mine. And that, after everything, was enough. He brought a pitch deck to a coffee where I only brought patience. February 1st, 9:30 in the morning, I walked into the cafe on Vine Street with nothing but my notebook and a steady calm. Evan was already there, laptop open, slides glowing with charts and buzzwords. He looked thinner, worn down, but his eyes still carried that restless gleam, the look of someone always hunting for shortcuts. "Dad," he said, almost pleading, "I've got a plan. If you back me this time, I can turn it around." He slid the laptop toward me. Numbers, projections, promises. All the things I used to want to believe. I pushed it back gently. "No, son. We're not talking about plans. We're talking about work." He blinked, like he hadn't heard me right. "Work? You mean?" "Yes," I said. A job. A paycheck you earn. Not a scheme you sign my name to. His face tightened. You don't understand how things are now. It's about leverage, Dad, about capital. I cut him off. It's about honesty. You want leverage? Earn trust first. For a long moment, we just sat there, the hiss of the espresso machine filling the silence. Finally, he closed the laptop, slower than he wanted to, like even that motion felt like defeat. He tried once more. At least co-sign a lease for me. Just to get me through the next few months. I shook my head. No, Evan. That's not what I'm here to give. I'll make introductions at the plant. I'll vouch for your willingness to work. That's it. His eyes flashed, anger, shame, maybe both. He leaned back, arms crossed, like a teenager again instead of a grown man. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the old brass house key I'd found still on his ring after the court date. And you can give me this. For a second, I thought he'd argue. But he slid the key across the table. I picked it up, heavy and warm in my palm, then slipped it into my jacket. When the bill came, I paid for both coffees. Not as a favor, just a line drawn in quiet ink. Back home, I placed that returned key in a small drawer marked proof. Then I opened my notebook, flipped past every page of receipts and dates, and wrote one last line: You didn't lose me, you gave me away. I set the pen down, closed the cover, and placed the book on the mantel next to an old photograph. In it, we were younger, me, Carla, and Evan at the county fair, sunlight in our hair, eyes unguarded. A different life. Then I stepped outside. The air was sharp, the river steady, the sky a cold stretch of gray. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a man clinging to the past. I felt like a man standing in the present, with a house that was mine, a life I had defended, and a truth no one could take away. Because in the end, revenge isn't about destruction. It's about boundaries. And justice is the quiet knowledge that every receipt, every photograph, every page of a notebook can outlast a lie.